For 21 years, people swam above this place. They jumped off the ledges, took photos, floated over the blue funnel in the bed of a creek. Below them, some 20-odd meters down, behind a gap 40 centimeters wide, a man remained. Neither divers nor $20,000 worth of equipment could reach him. September 1979. Jacob's Well, Texas. Two 20-year-olds strip off their tanks to squeeze into the fourth chamber. The rescuer who goes in after them will very nearly stay down there himself. Why did an ordinary hole in a creek bed turn out to be stronger than an entire industry with money and equipment behind it? Depth had nothing to do with it. Northwest of the town of Wimberley, in the hills of central Texas, Cypress Creek runs over a rocky bed. In one spot, the bottom drops away. A round hole about 4 meters across, clean limestone walls, water so clear you can count the stones. This is Jacob's Well, a karst spring, and one of the most recognizable natural swimming holes in the Texas Hill Country. In summer, the place is packed. Families spread towels on the slabs. Kids refuse to get out of the water. Somebody dozes right there on the rock. From above, it looks like the perfect spot for a hot day. Cold spring water at an almost constant temperature, cypress shade, and not a single warning sign. The dangerous part starts below. The first 9 meters of the shaft run straight down. Then it breaks and angles off into the place sunlight no longer reaches. After that comes a chain of chambers separated by narrow passages. Each passage is tighter than the one before it. The floors of the chambers are lined with silt and fine, loose gravel. The water comes from the Trinity, the underground aquifer lying beneath this whole region. In 1924, the flow of the spring was measured at roughly 170 gallons per second, and the jet shot almost 2 meters above the surface. The water holds around 20 degrees Celsius year-round, and in the dry months, the spring is one of the few places in the county with any running water at all. The average depth of the explored part of the system is about 36 meters. The maximum is 42. What separates a swimmer at the rim from the lower system is more than depth. Between them lie the whole shaft of the well and a chain of restrictions, each one demanding its own solution and its own training. That gap is why Jacob's Well ended up on the lists of the most dangerous dive sites in the United States. That same gap is why the spring has a list of its own dead. The list opened in the summer of '64. Back then, the spring was completely open ground. Drive your car down to the creek bed, unload your tanks, get in. No permits, no fences, no briefing, nobody to ask what you intended to do underwater. The gear itself was sold with almost no strings attached. You could buy scuba equipment and walk out with it, and diving in flooded caves had not yet taken shape as a separate discipline with its own rules and required training. People who could dive in a lake or in the ocean assumed this was the same kind of job. The difference between open water and a cave is that in open water you can always go up. In a cave, there is no up. There is rock over your head, and the only way out is back, along the same route you came in on. From the surface, that difference is completely invisible. On July 18, 1964, 2 young men died in the well, Eddie Cantrell and Ken Hamilton. Both were around 20. Both were ordinary open water divers with no specialized training. They are the first documented deaths at Jacob's Well. The list kept growing for another 20 years. Between 1964 and 1984, 9 people died in the spring, 8 men and 1 woman. The woman's name isn't confirmed in any public source. She appears on the lists with no name and no date. All of the dead were adults. The youngest of them was 19. The scenario repeated itself almost word for word. People arrived who felt confident in the water. They went deeper than they had planned, and they ran into places where ordinary skills stopped working, and they had no specialized ones. Every one of those cases ended the same way. Gear left up top, a car, and the question of who was going to go down now and bring the person back. In Hays County, the same diver answered those calls. Donald Alvin Dibble III was born in Houston on September 18, 1940. From 1962 to 1971, he served in the Navy, went through Vietnam, and trained as a military diver, which means he worked underwater in places with no visibility, where the job matters more than comfort. In civilian life, he didn't leave the water. From 1973, Dibble taught diving at Texas State University in San Marcos. In 1976, he opened a business of his own, the Dive Shop on Ranch Road 12. The shop quickly became the meeting point for the whole Texas Hill Country. People bought gear there, trained there, arranged trips there. Dibble was the owner, the operator, and the head instructor all at once, and he held the top instructor rating. His reputation was a particular one. He was known as a man whose safety rules were not up for discussion. The kind who would call off a dive over one faulty piece of equipment and wouldn't explain himself twice. And there was no second specialist like him in the county. When somebody had to be found underwater in Hays or in the counties next door, they called him. He knew Jacobs well, better than anyone. By the end of the 70s, Dibble had personally brought up most of those who went into that spring and didn't come out. It was unpaid volunteer work. He would show up, go down, find them, and give the families back whatever he could. Every one of those call-outs meant descending into the same place where he had already found others, and he never got used to it. On September 4th, 1978, the well took 23-year-old Stephen Walker, one more name on the list and one more call-out, back into the murky water of the third chamber. A year and 5 days remained before the night that would nearly cost Dibble his own life. In early September of 1979, a line of cars from the coast pulled up to the spring. About 20 divers from Pasadena, the Texas town next to Houston, had come to Wimberley for the weekend. They made camp right by the water, a standard club outing, tents, a compressor, tanks in the shade, talk around the fire in the evening, plans for the morning. Among them were two 20-year-olds. Kent Holmes Maupin had started diving at 12. By 20, he already held an instructor rating and worked at a dive shop, which meant he was teaching other people. Mark Allen Brashear was a student at San Jacinto College. Depending on the source, he was 20 or 21. Both of them knew the water well, and their confidence was earned. But neither had cave training, the separate course that adds the rules of an enclosed, flooded space to ordinary skills. Courses like that already existed by then, but in Texas they were rare, and most local divers never took one. Nobody had planned a dive into the deep chambers for that evening. It wasn't on the schedule for the trip. Maupin and Brashear had no backup lights with them and no guideline, the line you reel out behind you from the entrance so you can find the way back in zero visibility. For a cave, those are the two most basic things. Without the line, you can't find your way out blind. Without a second light, any failure of the light leaves you in the dark for good. Based on what was later pieced together, they decided to go for the fourth chamber right there on the spot, with no preparation and without talking it over with the senior divers. People were already in the water, the restriction was right there, the hour was late, and they went. It was just past midnight on September 9th when the lights went under. For the well itself, the time of day means nothing. At depth, it is always dark. But up top, it was night, the camp was asleep, and none of the senior divers in the group was standing at the rim. For a club outing in those years, that was simply how things were done. Several people went down, including Joe Moy, an experienced diver who stayed close to Maupin and Brashear. The descent here comes in steps. The first chamber sits at the foot of the vertical shaft, about 9 meters below the surface, roomy, still with a sense of open space. From there, the passage leads lower, another 11 meters or so. The third chamber slopes gently downward, from a little over 20 meters to 27 at its lowest point. The whole story comes down to that chamber. The floor of the third is covered in fine, loose gravel. It isn't packed down. It holds at an angle and starts moving at the slightest nudge, a fin stroke, an elbow brushing the ceiling. At the far end of the third chamber is the way into the fourth, a slot about 40 centimeters wide and roughly 4.5 meters long. Some accounts say 38 centimeters, others say 45. Either way, the number means one thing. You physically cannot fit through it with gear on your back. The method for getting through was known. You had to take the tank off and move through the slot without it on your back, without interrupting your breathing. The gap is tight enough that the body is pinned by rock on both sides. Maupin went first. Brashear followed him in. Joe Moy stayed outside. He hovered at the mouth of the restriction and watched the whole thing from arm's length. He saw his friends strip off their gear and disappear one by one into the black opening. He tried to stop them. You can't talk underwater, so Moy did the one thing you do in that situation. He waved his light, caught a face in the beam, then started banging his knife against his own tank. Metal on aluminum carries for tens of meters, and every diver knows what it means. Stop. Look at me. By his own later account, Brashear didn't react to the signal. He was looking down at his own tank, and he pulled it in after him into the dark. Moy waited. He banged again. There was no answer. No knocking, no beam, no movement of water at the entrance. He couldn't follow them, and going for help meant abandoning his post. It was 23 meters to the surface and several minutes of ascent. Then a brown cloud came out of the slot. Sediment stirred up somewhere in. There was pushing its way out, and it swallowed the whole near end of the chamber. To anyone who understands caves, that is the worst sign there is. Somebody inside is tearing up the floor. Visibility in the passage by that point was zero. Moy was running out of air. He was hanging in the third chamber against a time limit of his own, and past that limit, his own emergency would begin. He couldn't stay any longer. Before going up, he did the last thing in his power. He set his light down at the mouth of the slot and left it burning. A beacon in the murk for anyone working their way out. Then he turned and headed for the surface. Nobody came out of the slot. The phone at the dive shop in San Marcos rang in the morning. By that hour, there was no calling this a rescue anymore. The air in the tanks Maupin and Brashear had gone in with was exhausted long before dawn. This was a recovery. Don Dibble drove out to the spring and started rigging up by the book. Calvin Turner went in as his partner. They took a guideline, the very safety line the two men hadn't had, and tied it off to keep a physical connection to the exit and to the surface. The line isn't only navigation. A tug on it tells the surface you're in trouble. The first dive was planned as reconnaissance. Find where the bodies were, judge the state of the passage, and decide what to do next. Dropping into the third chamber, they saw Moy's light. It was still lying where he had left it in the night, still burning, still aimed toward the restriction. The water had partly settled overnight, and the picture read clearly. The passage was packed shut. Gravel had come down off the ceiling and the walls and buried the mouth of the slot until almost nothing was left of the old opening. Dibble looked at what a few hours earlier had been a passage and understood. The bodies were behind that fill, and to reach them somebody would have to take the material out. Not swim through, not squeeze through. Dig, load after load at 23 meters. He had about 10 minutes of working air left. He decided to move right up to the slot and see what he was actually dealing with. How much material, how well it was holding, where he could get a grip. Experience told him a loose slope should be touched as little as possible, but there was no other way to size up the job. He moved toward the fill. The slope let go without warning. A mass of gravel came down from above and covered Dibble, pinning him from the waist up. The worst of it was his arms. Both were trapped against his body. He couldn't reach the safety line to tug it, and he couldn't strike anything against his tank. Both channels of contact with his partner were cut off by a single shift of rock. What follows comes from his own account. He fought to pull himself out of the fill, and in that fight he burned through the rest of his air. Working at full effort underwater eats a gas supply many times faster than calm swimming, and the supply ran out before the gravel let go. He reached the point where he stopped fighting. What got him out was something he was no longer controlling. His body responded on its own, reflexively, and it pulled him clear of the fill. Calvin Turner was right there and pushed the mouthpiece of a spare tank at him. The depth at that moment was around 27 meters. Dibble inhaled so hard that part of the air went not into his lungs, but into his stomach. Physics did the rest. Gas taken into the body at depth expands on the way up. The less pressure outside, the greater its volume. He went up fast and barely conscious, and the air in his stomach swelled the whole way. On the surface, the doctors first suspected a gas embolism, the classic injury of a fast ascent. The X-ray showed something else, a rupture of the stomach wall and peritonitis. One of the medics said it was like 5 appendixes bursting at once. Dibble was operated on. He survived and he recovered. He walked out of the hospital about $8,000 in debt. Nobody paid him for volunteer work, and the cost of treatment landed on him. While the best diver in the county was lying in a hospital room, a whole camp was going up along Cypress Creek. The accident with Dibble had shown the job was beyond a couple of volunteers, and professionals were brought in. Diver Don Broad arrived. Then came the commercial diving company of Louis Schaefer, with equipment, with people, and with a recompression chamber in case of a decompression accident. The chamber wasn't brought out for show. On long work at that depth, decompression sickness is treated with pressure and with nothing else. It doesn't clear up on its own. They were counting on a day or two. The specialists believed they were dealing with an ordinary underwater job. Go down, clear it, bring them up. The gravel disagreed. Every time they managed to open up the area at the slot, the slope started moving again and buried the work. It went in cycles, and every cycle ran into the same thing. A cleared passage disappeared within minutes, and visibility after each attempt dropped to nothing. The operation dragged on and got expensive. The total cost passed $20,000, which in 1979, money was a very large sum for Hays County. They tried workarounds too. Ralph Powell strapped a video camera to a broom handle and fed the whole contraption into the slot just to see what was in there. The camera showed gear. Reaching the men themselves was not possible. He described the conditions in a few words. You look straight down at the floor and you see nothing. 12 days after the night dive, the search was officially called off. Some sources say 3 weeks. Either way, the decision was the same. The two of them couldn't be brought out from under the collapse, and pushing further meant risking another rescuer. The equipment was hauled away, the camp came down, the creek went on running. To the families that explained nothing. But by then people did understand what had happened inside the slot. Footage from the broom handle camera and a look at the passage itself were enough to reconstruct the mechanism. Maupin and Breachier didn't get stuck in the restriction. They were digging their way through it. The passage into the fourth chamber was partly filled at that moment with that same loose gravel. To move forward, each of them had to rake the material out ahead of himself. There was nowhere to put it. The slot is narrow, and a body takes up almost the entire gap. The gravel went backward, behind them. That was the trap. Every handful closed off the way back. A man moved forward tens of centimeters at a time, and with that same motion, he built a plug behind himself. At some point, the passage stopped being a passage in both directions and became a corridor in one. There is no turning around in there. The width doesn't allow it. They had no guideline to feel their way out with. No backup light either, and in the silt they had raised, it wouldn't have given them much anyway. This is very different from a typical cave accident. Nobody got lost in a maze here. Nobody miscalculated air on a long route. Here, as reconstructed, the deciding factor was loose material, the same trap that a few hours later nearly cost Dibble his life. The case went into American cave diving accident analyses as an example of how much the makeup of the floor matters, even when the route itself is simple. The fourth chamber they were heading for, by the accounts of those who saw it later, looks nothing like that. Clean cave with limestone formations, no gravel, a thin layer of silt on the floor. The two of them were only a few meters short of it. Back from the hospital, Dibble decided to close the spring off with his own hands. He gathered volunteers, went back to the well, and sealed the passage into the fourth chamber with bags of Portland cement. It was both a technical measure and a decision in principle. The place where the two men remained was closed. In January of 1980, he went further. At the entrance to the third chamber, Dibble built a grate out of rebar and fast-setting concrete, a structure that physically blocked the way to that restriction. The logic was simple. If 40 centimeters of rock and shifting gravel don't stop people, let rebar stop them. He paid for the materials and the labor himself. 6 months later, he came back to check how the concrete was holding. The grate was gone. Somebody had gone down with tools, deliberately taken the structure apart, and left a note. Its meaning came down to one line: "You won't stop us." The argument that started then is still running in the dive community today. Some hold that closing caves is the only thing that actually saves lives. Others hold that an adult has a right to his own risk, and that a grate only turns a dive into a violation and makes it more dangerous. The well didn't stop taking people. In the third chamber, there is a vertical tunnel 2 or 3 meters long that in murky water looks like a way up, but in fact dead ends against solid limestone. That feature is known as the false chimney. On November 23, 1983, 22-year-old Richard Madison Patton and 24-year-old Clark McConnell went into it during an emergency ascent. McConnell managed to get out. Patton reached the dead end and died. Some sources place this case in 1984. On February 26, 1984, 36-year-old Wayne Wood Russell Jr. died in the well, the 9th on the list. The work the divers couldn't do was partly done by the water itself. In 1981, a flood ran through the system. Heavy rain in the hill country raises the level fast, and the flow through the well is strong enough to move material. That flow carried Mark Brashear out of the spring. 2 years after the night dive, his family finally had the chance to bury him. Kent Maupin wasn't found for almost 2 more decades. Up above, ordinary life went on all those years. Every summer, thousands of visitors, cars along the creek bed, a line for the water, kids shrieking, and 20-odd meters below them, past the restriction, lay a man nobody had managed to bring back. By the end of the 90s, the technique of cave diving looked completely different. Reels with guideline, redundant lights, gas planning, surface support. Everything the two of them didn't have in '79. In October of 2000, a team from SMART went into the fourth chamber. That is the San Marcos Area Recovery Team, a group that does underwater search and mapping. Dan and Kathy Misiaszek went down together with Jim Price, with a support crew working up top. The task was filming and mapping the far end of the system. Wade Parham of SMART said later that they simply came across Maupin during an ordinary working expedition. Some sources date the recovery to 2001. 21 years passed between his disappearance and his return. Outside Texas, Jacob's Well became known not for record depth and not for the length of its passages. It has neither. What made the spring famous was 4.5 meters of narrow slot. That is where the work of a professional diving crew with a recompression chamber came to an end. The open access of 64 is gone. Today this is Jacob's Well Natural Area, a protected site managed by the Hays County Parks Department. In 2010, the county bought about 20 hectares of land around the mouth, and later, the protected area grew to shield the spring from development. The rules changed radically. Swimming is by reservation only, and only in season. Jumping from the ledges is banned. You can't simply drop into the underground section even with a certification. Underwater work is handled by the Jacob's Well Exploration Project, a team with a permit from the county. They are the ones who mapped roughly 1,800 meters of passage in 2 main tunnels. By that survey, Jacob's Well is the longest cave in Hays County and one of the longest fully flooded caves in Texas. In exchange, a different problem showed up, one with nothing to do with diving. In 2000, the spring stopped flowing for the first time in the history of observations. Then it happened again in 2008, in 2011, in 2013, and in 2022. Since 2022, swimming has been suspended more than once, and the seasons of recent years have opened only partially. The cause is years of drought in central Texas and growing withdrawals from the Trinity Aquifer, the same one that feeds the well. For the county, this stopped being a diving question long ago and became a water supply question. That same aquifer feeds the wells of Wimberley residents and the ranches around them. The spring that once shot a 2-meter jet now risks ending up as a dry hole in a creek bed. Don Dibble lived to be 80. He died on February 5th in 2021, having run his shop on Ranch Road 12 for more than 40 years, and remaining to the end the instructor the county turned to for underwater searches. The stomach rupture he took at 27 meters in September of '79 never drove him out of the water.